We're live.
Hey guys, how you doing? It's the guys here at Wealth for Life. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So, if you're like me, you've heard a lot of news about the property market of late. There's no news channel you can't turn on to or newspaper that you can't pick up that has some sort of commentary about the property market. Well, the property market's going to crash and burn. Okay? Absolute carnage. In fact, one news channel put it recently that we're going to have a drop of up to 40% in property prices in Melbourne and Sydney. Our economy is going to collapse. Unemployment Armageddon. You see, if it's on the news, it must be right. If it's in the newspapers, it must be right. After all, they've never been wrong, right? Alright guys, let's get serious. As far back as 1997, the news and the media predicted that the property market was going to crash. 12 months later, the property market in Melbourne and Sydney actually boomed. Alright? Just as far back as 2016, they also predicted the Australian property market was going to crash, but actually went up by 30 to 50% in some parts of Melbourne and Sydney. It's a funny thing, the news. If you listen to the news, Hillary Clinton was a shoo-in to win the US presidential election back in 2016. We all know what happened there. And apparently, if you read these magazines and watch the news, Jennifer Aniston is back with Brad Pitt. Funny thing is, another media publication says that Angelina's back with Brad Pitt. All I can say is that Brad Pitt's a lucky guy. Seriously, guys. It's not the first time that the media has predicted doom and gloom in the property market, and it's not going to be the last time that it's going to say the same thing, right? Media needs to get ratings, okay? And to put an ad out there that the market's going to cool off by 2 to 3%, that doesn't pull any ratings. It doesn't sell any newspapers. It doesn't sell any magazines. When the world is doing well and people are happy and things are going well, that doesn't sell. It doesn't get people to tune into the news, right? We're all controlled by fear and doom and gloom, and that's what the media use. They use the Elvis found headline to get you to tune in. Property prices going to drop by 40%. That's what the news says. Well, they actually said could drop by up to 40%. But as viewers, what we take away from that is that property prices are going to drop by 40%, and we all go into a panic, right? So, I having been an investor now for 20 years, you've heard all this before. I've heard all this before. But, I looked at the news, the 60 Minutes article a couple of weeks back, and I thought, okay, I'm going to just go and go to where I usually go to have a look if there's any indicators of anything like this happening. And, our economy is doing very, very, very well, all right? So if you want to know whether the property market's going to crash and burn, that's not going to happen, okay? What we're experiencing right now is probably nothing more than a process, right? We're in a different cycle of the property cycle. You've got your boom, you've got a part of the cycle that cools off a little bit, and for guys that have been in the property game, investors, real estate guys that are seasoned guys, right? That have been around the 40 plus years, they've seen and heard it all before. Okay, so none of these guys really pay any attention to this because it's. They've said it in the past, they'll continue to say it in the future, and the market will continue to do what it's done over the last 50, 60 years. So please don't go panicking and thinking, and start to make irrational decisions with your investment portfolio, or hold off and continue to be a spectator in the property game, okay? Property prices are not going to crash, all right? When I look at the statements that people make, market's going to crash by 40%. What it tells me is that they're really uneducated and uninformed with the overall Australian economy, right? Because for that to happen, we'd need to have a major depression, right, in Australia, and there's nothing indicating that that's going to happen, right? Our employment figures are stronger than ever. In fact, we're creating more jobs than ever. Interest rates are quite low. I covered this off on an article not long ago, and I don't see interest rates creeping up over 6%. and then you hear the other thing, that there's an oversupply of properties. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm in Melbourne, and I understand the Melbourne and Sydney markets quite well. And whilst there may be a little bit of an oversupply in Brisbane with apartments, I don't see it in Melbourne and Sydney. The one thing that the news forget to always point out when they talk about oversupply is the amount of people that are creeping and coming into Melbourne and Sydney, the population increase, right? Last count, there was like 1,400, 1,500 people a week heading into Victoria. You never get that reported on the news. So you get one hand that says there's an oversupply, but they never tell you the other hand, right? Because again, it's supposed to put you in fear, all right? And when you look at it, banks to some extent have a big say in the property, in the performance of property, right? Or your ability to get into the property market. So the way I've always seen banks is that they're my business partner, right? So if you and I are out there, for instance, we'll get into business together, right? It's no different to the way you get into the property cycle with a bank. They're getting into business with you. They're giving you 80% of the value of the asset that you're going to purchase, right? Now, if the market was going to crash by 40%, as these doomsayers are actually predicting, the bank would actually have a problem, right? Because they'd be exposed to the tune of 20%. Now, the reality is that the average loan-to-value ratio in the market today is around 75%, okay? So if the world did end, right, banks would have an exposure of 75%, right? So, or 15% if you believe that the market's going to crash by 40%, right? So I don't see that happening because, banks Banks have two rules, okay? Very important for you to understand this when approaching a bank or when doing lending. Bank only have two rules. Number one, never to lose money. Number two, to make money. And in that order. So if a bank's going to lend you 80%, or in some cases even up to 95% with mortgage insurance, don't you think they know something that you don't? Right? If the market was really going to bottom out like people are predicting, why would the banks continue to lend 80% against the value of the asset? Okay, based on what I've seen, I don't really see the market doing anything more than what it's done. So it may cool off a little bit in some areas, Melbourne and Sydney. But guys, remember this: we've had a great time in the market over the last 3 years, where we've had 40% increases in some parts of Melbourne and Sydney. Now you'd be just as foolish to think that that's going to continue as well. So if you've had a growth of 40% and it tapers off by 2 to 3%, are you really going to care? Okay, provided that you haven't, leveraged yourself too high and continue to borrow on that equity, you're in a good position, right? Household debt right now is, not as bad again as the media make you out to believe it, right? We have a healthy economy. A lot of our economy, and this is the thing that people fail to understand when they make these statements, right? A lot of our economy is underpinned by the property market, okay? We have, the construction industry, for example, is the third biggest industry in Australia, okay, behind healthcare and retail. Now, do you really think that the banks and the government are gonna, are gonna want to see the property market collapse? Now, could you imagine what that does for employment in our third biggest industry? It would create, a loss of jobs to the tune that we've never seen before, to the scale we've never seen before in Australia. And don't forget, guys, the government's biggest source of income is income taxes, is taxes, right? Your taxes, the taxes you pay, the taxes I pay. So the market crashing means too many people in that sector would be unemployed. The government would lose a lot of income. So cheekily enough, it's actually in the government's best interest to continue to have the property market plod along for a better term, okay? Now, I'm not one of these guys out there that's going to tell you the market's going to continue to boom and boom and boom and boom and just keep borrowing and keep buying, because that's not true either, okay? And you'd be just as foolish if you took that information on board. But understand the fundamentals, right? And this is the key, the fundamentals that drive the property market, right? It's plays such a big part of our economy, right? We've got a strong population growth continuing, 25 million I think it is, that we just passed over in Australia, living in Australia right now. And there's plans in place to have that boom to 40 million in the next 3 decades or so. So again, they don't report that on the news, right? Because it's good news. But the 4 factors that continually drive the property market are this: employment, population. Okay, if you're in a city with very strong employment and population, hence Melbourne and Sydney, you're in the right place, right? And then you want to make sure that there's good infrastructure in place and planned infrastructure. So when carefully selecting an asset, make sure that those factors at a macro level are in place, okay? And then it's really, you've got to do your homework more at a micro level with regards to suburbs and streets and so forth. And again, that's stuff that we can help you on. But our banking system is very, very strong. AAA rated banks. Don't pay attention to what happened in America 10 years ago, okay? It's a different lending system, different sorts of criteria. And they were giving out loans at 0% interest rates to people that couldn't even afford them at 0%, okay? And then when the honeymoon rate was over and interest rates creeped up to 2%, bang, everything crashed, okay? That's what happens when you can walk into a 7-Eleven store in America and get a home loan, okay? So our banking system here is quite strong, and if you've borrowed in the last 2-3 years, banks' assessment criteria, the interest rate that they assess you on is around 8%, 7 to 8%. So they want to make sure that if interest rates ever got to that, you'd be comfortable with the loan that you're borrowing. So, if you've got a loan in the last few years, believe me, you deserve it, and the banks are more than comfortable that you can hold on to it. All right. So I don't see interest rates. I don't see interest rates for a number of reasons creeping anywhere over 6%. Right. The banks and the government still need to stimulate the small business economy, and lifting interest rates up over 6%, in my opinion, would kill that part of the sector off. And small business owners right now are borrowing, and we need to stimulate that market there so they can continue to borrow, expand their business, and employ more people. So if you understand the bigger picture in Australia, you'd come to understand that silly statements like a price drop of up to 40% is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm telling you right now, don't go paying any attention to that, okay? Because it's just designed to put you in fear, to keep you as a spectator. So you end up doing nothing, and to a large extent, get controlled. That's the intent of the media that's out there and the news channels that are out there. They've got to sensationalize things so you tune in, they get their ratings, they sell their magazines, and then you go into a panic and you do nothing. You want the property market to do really well, just turn off the news and don't read the newspapers, okay? Because it's you buying into that actually does cause that as well. All right. So, listen. In summary, you're not going to have there's not going to be a crash of 40%. Okay. At the same time, don't expect it to continue to do what it's done over the last 3 years again. My view is that real estate investment and is a very, very good asset class, a very good investment vehicle, but get knowledge on it. Don't go making decisions based on incorrect knowledge that it's going to continue to boom. And the definition of boom is outperforming what it's designed to do. It's still a very safe asset class, but make sure that when you invest, you make it part of a much, much bigger picture. Okay, take on responsible lending and address all the risks that are involved. Right? Again, get knowledge up. Take the right level of responsibility so you can control the outcome. Investing is about being able to control the outcome, okay? Different to speculating, okay? You can go out there and buy a property as a speculator, and all you do is you hope, okay? It's like playing Tats Lotto, right? You kind of hope for the result. Speculating doesn't require any knowledge. It doesn't require you to take any responsibility because you're playing in hope, okay? A sound investment strategy means that you've done some planning, you've got knowledge, you've taken the right level of responsibility so you can control the outcome. All right. So again, guys, don't go buying into the fear that's out there in the market at the moment. Our economy is still very, very, very strong. As I said before, the Australian property market is really made up of the Melbourne and Sydney markets. If you're looking to make money in real estate, they're the only 2 markets you should be buying in. Don't buy into stuff up in Queensland and Brisbane. I know very, very few people that have made money in Brisbane, and those that have could have made better money in Melbourne and Sydney. Okay, so they're the 2 cities that are driving the Australian property market. Don't go panicking and going into fear. Sit down, make it part of a much, much bigger strategy when you're looking at property. Always have a start and an exit strategy, okay? So know, when to get in, and then know when to get out as well, okay? Because part of a sound investment strategy is to make sure that you have no debt. So that's what I want to talk about today, guys. I'd been inundated with phone calls, SMSs, and texts about certain news articles out there, and the topic I was actually going to talk about today was totally something different. But I figured I needed to put this out there into the market because it's not all doom and gloom. In fact, the market's doing quite well. And if anything, there are fantastic buying opportunities out there right now. My staff, they're continuing to buy. Our clients are continuing to buy. One of my staff members purchased some property on the weekend. Don't pay attention to all that stuff, okay? So that's it for today, guys. I hope you got a lot out of that. I'm sorry if I scared you guys over the last few days with all that doom and gloom, but I did prove a point. We've had more people tune in and respond than any other Facebook feed that we've done. And sadly, it's because fear is what motivates people. But I'm here to tell you, you don't need to be in panic and you don't need to be in fear. Don't pay a lot of attention to the news and the newspapers. My experience only, I've learnt nothing from the news and the newspapers, okay? They haven't taught me anything, okay? So, and I don't believe you're going to get anything of any value in life by watching the news and listening and reading the newspapers, okay? Have a sensible approach to building wealth, okay? Responsible lending, sensible approach, and take care of all the factors that go into play when lending and building a wealth creation strategy. All right, guys? Listen, make sure you tune in next week. I've got an amazing episode next week where I interview a 28-year-old who's been investing in real estate now for 7 years, done remarkably well. And here she is at the age of 28 and has accumulated and done so well for herself. And I want to let her tell you her story of how she started, I think, at the age of 20, 21, and what she's accumulated, but more so the life she's actually created for herself and her family in the process. And it's riveting stuff, man. So come on board next week, 12 o'clock, next Tuesday, same time, same place, and look forward to speaking to you then. Thanks, guys.